Okay, Nilay Hocam, you can start if you want.
Thank you, Nina Hocam. Good evening, dear students, faculty members, and valuable guests. Welcome to the first ArchiDesign Talk of 2021 spring semester. It's great to meet you again in extracurricular activities. This evening, our guest is Sena Özfiliz, an architect, photographer, lecturer, and a PhD candidate. I'm very delightful to moderate this event because he is also an old friend of mine. First, I would like to briefly introduce him. Sena Özfiliz gained his bachelor degree at Mimar Sinan Fine Arts University, Faculty of Architecture, and master's degree from Architectural Faculty of Istanbul Technical University. He lectured in various universities on sports architecture and on architectural photography at Bahçeşehir University, gave lectures and directed workshops on photographic depictions of architecture. His ongoing doctoral research is on critical photographic representations of urban change. He is a member of Union of International Architects, Sports and Leisure Work Group since 2005. His photographical production focuses on urban space, space-time photography interrelation, and everyday life of architectural spaces. He continues his professional photography career based in Istanbul since 2012 as Sena Özfiliz Visual Documentary of Architecture, introducing archilithography approach. In parallel with his academic studies, he travels to different countries at intervals to attend conferences as part of the UIA work group and photographs architecture and urban life. His photographs are awarded for exhibitions in many national photo competitions and in the first Istanbul Design Biennial, and also published in some national and international architectural magazines, periodicals, and books. As an architect and visual documenter, he is a member of the team Han Tümertekin and collaborators invited to the 17th International Venice Architectural Exhibition that will take place 2021, this year, hopefully. He was also member of the Team Architectural Biennial 2020 Turkish Pavilion finalists Before Use Afterlife, created by Sevgi Türkkan. He had 3 solo photography exhibitions up to date, mainly focusing on sporting landscapes, stay and play. Today, he is going to give us a talk on alternative approaches on photographic representations of space. During the pandemics, our acquaintance, relation, and use of photography as a tool for design communication has also transformed, and I believe we are all becoming more aware of its increasing significance and role in our daily lives. So I believe this talk will broaden our vision about photography, specifically in terms of representation of space. Dear students, you can write your questions to the chat box during and at the end of the presentation. I am going to moderate the questions. And now, after this brief introduction, Sena Hocam, the screen is yours.
Thank you for the introduction, and it's a pleasure to be here together with you, with old friends, and also Bahçeşehir University is also my university that I'll give lectures, so I'm happy to be here again. So let's start the presentation. Can you see my screen?
Yes.
Okay, there's no problem. Actually, I'm working, as Nilay Hoca summarized, I'm working as an architectural photographer or visual documenter that I call. And apart from my business, apart from my career in architectural photography, especially in my PhD thesis, I'm also focused on critical representations of the urban area. So this presentation will be a kind of a hybrid between these two, between my commercial production and my academic study. So I'm focused on alternative approaches in photographic representation of space. I want to start first. By the way, I have to add that this presentation is kind of a didactic presentation in some way, because there are so many students listening to this. That's why I wanted to give a kind of introduction to why we shoot spaces. There are some purposes that we shoot spaces, make photographs of spaces. It can be advertising or publicity purpose to introduce the work to the public, or it can be a documentation purpose that to document, for example, the construction sites, or making surveys of the old buildings, etc. We can use photographs for interpretation and critiques as a companion to, for example, critical or visual essays. Photographs, we can photograph spaces for artistic purposes. It can be a basis, a good basis for artistic production. And there can be other reasons that, for example, to create memory of our existence in space. Of course, there are potential problems in shooting spaces. There can be, for example, if you are shooting for an editor or for an architect or for a person who hires you for photographing the subject, there can be some technical and aesthetic challenges. There can be the client's concern. It can be an architect or the builder, constructor, if you are making an architectural photography. The purpose of the documentation is important, of course. It can be for publicity purposes, or it can be for documenting the work. Also, the photographer's attitude, the personality of the photographer, and his or her vision is important in creating a photograph. There's always an ambivalent relationship between photography and space. This comes from difficulty of representing three-dimensional space in two-dimension. And if we add time as the fourth dimension, we can say that we have to squeeze 4 dimensions in a 2-dimension space. It can be a printed surface, or it can be a digital surface like a screen. So this makes you render the representation. So you think of it, you try to find ways to represent the 4-dimension in 2-dimension, and it also causes personal viewpoints and interference of the photographer. So the photographer himself or herself becomes the person who defines the photograph, who defines the content of the photograph. When we start with the history of photography, we can see that the first earliest surviving photograph is the subject is a space. It is a view from a window in France. You can see the printed version and the original plate version of that photograph. So the first photograph was actually fixed on a plate, on a metal plate, not on a paper. But the subject was space. So from the beginning of photography, space and photography always went parallel to each other and always have relationship with each other. And every progress in photography or in space making, there's always relationship between them. And also the first photograph, this is one of the most well-known photographs in photography history, is also showing an urban space. And later on, this technique is called daguerreotype, and it was announced in 1839 as the invention of photography. The subject was here was a boulevard in Paris, and you can see. I don't know, you cannot see my cursor, but on the below you will see two persons standing. These are the first persons who is captured in a photograph in the world history. That's because they were not moving, because you need you need longer exposure times for fixing the photograph. And you cannot see the cars, the horses passing by, but the two guys, one of them is shining his boots. That's why they are standing, and you can see in the photograph, fixed in the photograph. And also the first positive, which is developed from a negative, is also an interior space. It was shot by William Henry Fox Talbot in 1835 in England. So the subject is again as an interior space. And Jules Janin, after the invention of photography, who wrote the first critique about photography, was aware of the potential of photography for mobilizing and marketing architectural forms and ideas. And he refers to the power to change the perception of architecture and improve the awareness of architectural details. He saw that photography has a great potential of carrying ideas from a place to another place, and it will be so useful in terms of progressing architecture, for example. So later on, photographic collections became standard instruments for the work and training of architects and providing inspiration. Later on, the spaces are photographed to marketing touristic hotspots with photographs. I will give some examples to you. Documentation of monuments and heritage, to document building stages, like when they are constructing a building, to document the building stages, and also in documenting the transformation of the physical environment. There was a company called Picturesque Voyage. It was made up of some photographers. They traveled to faraway places like to ancient Greece and to Egypt, etc. And they make photographs of the ancient ruins. So it was a good subject for photography. And then those people carried all the information from those sites, and there were some publishing. There's, for example, Alinari Publishing started to publish them in books, and it still keeps alive from 1870 till today. So it was a very popular subject on those days. You can see other pictures from Egypt or from Palmyra Temple. So the subject was again capturing space. It can be ancient ruins, but still capturing space. And also there's a Mission Heliographic group called Mission Heliographic in France to document the French architectural heritage. And they started to capture the photographs of buildings in France. special monumental buildings or some, for example, train sheds, etc. You can see the Notre Dame Cathedral captured in 1855. As you know, it had a great fire 3 years ago, and probably these pictures can be used to rebuild the cathedral. It can have an help because of it's a very good documentation. And also the beginning of photogrammetry, which is like measuring the buildings and making their drawings from photographs. It was also established in Prussia, today's Germany, by an institute, by a Prussian Mapping Photography Institute. And later on, the documentation of building stages come to life. For example, you can see some photographs from the Louvre Museum construction and the Sacré-Cœur construction in Paris. Mostly the source of these kinds of photographs is Paris, because it was the place where the photography technique is invented. That's why you will see so many pictures from Paris or France. And during the Crystal Palace construction, they also documented the construction of the building, which was something very new for that time. And there was a structural steel aesthetics coming up for the world fairs or some kinds of exhibitions like this. And the most famous example of it is, of course, Eiffel Tower. And they also documented the construction phases of the Eiffel Tower as well. And one of the best, maybe, documentary usages of photography is documenting the changing urban spaces, the changing urban character of the cities. Again, it started with Paris. During at the end of the 19th century, there was a great transformation in Paris because of the Baron Haussmann, the mayor of Paris, had a great change in the physical appearance of Paris. They built great boulevards, which are alive today, and they demolished so many narrow streets of Paris to make bigger boulevards. And the reason for that was the barricades, which was built in narrow streets of Paris. You will see it in the first picture. So these are the first starting of the before-after pictures. Especially Charles Marville made the pictures from the same points after the transformation. So you can have a precise comparison of the both pictures before and after the transformation of the city. So these are very important documents. Some of them survived until today. Actually, some of them was burnt in a fire in Paris. And of course, as maybe the pioneer of alternative production of representation is Auger, which documented Paris almost 40 years during his life. He documented the daily life of Paris streets. Also, this is the period also of the Baron Haussmann transformation. So he also captured the transforming city with its daily life and buildings and streets. And some of his pictures which show Paris with empty streets, especially he shot in the mornings or in the very early in the mornings. These were like kind of surreal depictions of Paris later on, the surrealist artistic movement also used this as a source, these Age's photographs as a source for their movement. And later on in United States, Baroness Abbott, she also had the archive of Age. She discovered the archive of Age, and she also used the same technique to document the city. And she made the project Changing New York by documenting the city in 1930s, the transformation of New York. Later on, some romanticist photographers used shadow and light compositions to decipher the spaces. And we can see also some daily life effects or people using the spaces in some of the photographs. These are also pioneers of the alternative approaches to photographing space. And one of the pictures I like the most, and which was an inspiration for me, also a sea of steps. Also, actually, that's an abstract photograph, but we can see the traces of usage of the space from the worn-out steps of the cathedral, in the Wells Cathedral, and it's a very famous picture. It can show us the how the space can transform in time by usage without showing any human being. Also, other pictorialist, romanticist approaches to some very famous buildings. That's the Flatiron building in New York City. These were pictured from the adjacent park in some different weather conditions, even in the dark hours of the day, by famous photographers Stiglitz and Steichen. Later on, of course, Bauhaus used photography as a base for their studies, for artistic purposes. And Moholy-Nagy started to use photographs, started to capture space with different viewpoints, and started to bring a new vision to photography. And they showed it as a potential art form. Later on, new objectivity movement showed spaces, actually mostly urban spaces, and some different phases of urban spaces. For example, the picture on the right is the bridge from Köln, from Germany. And later on, this bridge was rebuilt again. It was a demolished railway bridge. And later on, of course, the relationship between the modernist architecture and photography started in 1920s, and it was very powerful until 1970s. And photography and architecture always, again, went parallel to each other. And these pictures you see, for example, probably as most of us are architects, most probably we have seen them in architectural history class. In the slides, probably, because they are so famous pictures. There's a relationship between modernist architecture and photography, because mostly in those times, architectural magazines were started to distribute all around the world. And if you want to introduce your design, the best way for it was of course, besides the drawings, the best way for it was photographing and introducing in the articles in architectural magazines and distributing to the world. And so modernist architecture spread it to the world. We can easily say that modernist architecture spread it in the world by photography. And of course, in the earlier days of modernist era, there were black and white photographs, and mostly we saw so many spaces in black and white. And these are the most famous. There was the picture on the right from Los Angeles was shot by Julius Schulman, one of the most famous architectural photographers of that era. And also Ezra Stolar. He was also educated in industrial design, and you can see it from the approach. And very famous, of course, icons of modernist era. We always saw them in photographs first. And Julius Schulman again. And these are very iconic photographs. And most of these buildings are known with those photographs, represented by those photographs. And the convention of architectural photography started to happen, which means like when you look at the pictures, there are some common elements that you cannot see so many people on the spaces in the modernist era. So there's a dehumanization. There are flawlessly organized interior spaces, like everything is designed. They usually avoid poor weather conditions in the shooting days. A good weather is selected for the shootings. And they usually avoid showing the abrasive effects of time. So everything, usually the buildings are shot just after they are completed. And they usually reflected individual buildings isolated from their context. And there were flawless geometrical arrangements of the frame. These are like became conventions of architectural photography. And it didn't change for a long time. Even today, it is still very effective, these conventions. Later on, the photography has been started to be used as an agent of legitimation. That is, you see a building very glossy, from a very nice angle, maybe usually shot in the night, like Gongzu Opera of Zaha Hadid. So it is like it is introducing the building, and it tries to show the architect's idea, to reflect the architect's idea. So there's a collaboration between photographer and the architect. But when you go there and make other pictures in other times of the day, or from close up when you come close to the building, maybe your impression can change, because it is not always, those buildings are not always as you see in the pictures. In order to compare. So Larry Speck, a photographer, went there and made some pictures of the Gongzu Opera from different angles, and he criticized this legitimation function of photographs with his shots. And of course, we cannot assume that the building in the photograph is not the building itself. It is just a representation of that building. So it is a photograph is also like a drawing. a drawing is also a representation of the building. So as John Sarkowski said, he's photography director of MoMA Museum in New York. A photograph of a building can never replace the actual building. So what can we do to represent the spaces as they are, as they really are? So there are some alternative approaches starting from there. Again, these are the precedents of alternative approaches who show spaces in their daily lives as the people using the spaces. These are from the start of the century, actually, from the 20th century. But these are like the examples, the first examples of it. Faye Lincoln, for example, pictured spaces with their actual users. And Le Corbusier was actually he was so obsessed with photographs and how his buildings are seen in the photographs. In the previous photographs, there was Villa Savoy. It was a perfect picture of Villa Savoy as Le Corbusier wanted, but another photographer, Lucien Herve, also collaborated with Le Corbusier, and he approached Le Corbusier buildings with a different viewpoint by documenting the life of the inhabitants of the buildings. These are from different designs of Le Corbusier apartments. Another architectural photographer, Balthazar Korab, also gave place to the users of the space. And one of the most important photographers in this sense is John Donat from Britain. He was shooting pictures for Architectural Review, and he was one of the first people who shot spaces while they are used or in improper weather conditions, like the one on the left. That's headquarters of a company on a rainy day. So these conventions started to change. There are some alternative photographers who started to show living space with the daily life, allowing other kinds of light and climate effects, and showing the buildings aging and the effects of weathering, and giving space to the context of the building, not just isolating the buildings from the surroundings. And they also tried to make some creative viewpoints. And when we come to alternative approaches, again, we can talk about the sociological perspectives. This one of the first example was from Jacob Ries. He documented the back locations of New York, and documented how the people, how the workers in that parts of New York are living. And his documentary project, How Other Half Lives, he made a book of that. And it helped change the conditions of these people in New York City. The administration of New York focused on these life conditions, and it made a big change by bringing these places to the stage. And during the 1930s, during the Great Depression, also social landscape photographers started to capture American rural landscape, the effects of the Depression. Volker Evans was one of the most important photographers of that time. He was picturing daily life. And later on in 1950s, especially after the Second World War, because of the changing environment, because of the changing, after the war, there were need of housing, mass housing, and the life conditions, living conditions of the peoples and the cities actually started to change, and most documentary photographers started to shoot spaces, and Architectural Review magazine gave place to these photographers. There are some examples you can see. These are all from Architectural Review issues. And later on, when we come to 1970s, there was an exhibition called New Topographics, and the photographers joining that exhibition started something new, that they started maybe the era of space as a tool for artistic production. Bernd and Hilla Beher, their husband-wife, they were lecturers in Düsseldorf Arts School, and they documented, for example, some anonymous buildings, like as you see, some industrial buildings, and they made an album with that, and they also exhibited in the New Topographics exhibition. And Stephen Shore from United States also one of the examples who used color photography also. And Lewis Baltz, he is also one of the starters of minimalism in photography. And from Düsseldorf School, there are some very famous photographers they are the students of Beher's. Thomas Struth and Andreas Gursky are among them. You may know Andreas Gursky from his very big dimensioned photographs which were exhibited in the museums, and the world's most expensive photography also belongs to him. It was some £1 million. And this is started with, of course, the color photography, and also the offset printing technologies helped to spread the photographs to the world. And also the demands of the advertisers has a great influence on color photography as well. Of course, later on, with the start of postmodernism, we can say that there was a return to formal abstraction with the effect of postmodernism, and the book Learning from Las Vegas was a good inspiration for that. So especially American landscapes were photographed in color. William Eggleston was one of the persons who brought everyday life and color photography to an artistic realm. Richard Wentworth also photographed everyday details. And this Ivan Ban is actually he can be called as architectural photographer. He also went from the road who John Donat opened, and he always tried to photograph architecture with the users, with the context around. For example, there are two books from him. One of them is called Brasilia Chandigarh. He went to this famous iconic city, and Le Corbusier and Oscar Niemeyer's cities, and photographed them photograph these icons' daily lives today. And also Torre David is a very important work of him. They made this book with Urban Think Tank. Torre David is a abundant, actually it's not a finished skyscraper in Venezuela. And this skyscraper was invaded by people, and all the people made their own spaces in that skyscraper, as you see in the facade of it. There are so many different facades who were built by the people who live in the building, and Ivan Baum photographed the daily lives of those people in that building, documented, let me say. And there's also one of my inspirations is Michael Vesely. He photographs some construction sites, for example, a building of a museum like he did in MoMA in New York. He captured the building during 2 years, and he layered all the photographs over and over, and we can see the 2 years in one picture. So this is kind of a time lapse, which is very common today, and I will show you some examples. But we can see a time lapse in this one single photograph. Of course, Gabriele Basilico is one of the most important photographers who used urban space for inspiration. He also came to Istanbul for Istanbul Biennale in 2005 and captured Istanbul as well. Edward Burtynsky captures landscapes which is transformed by humankind. It can be a kind of mine, it can be a stone mine, or it can be a dam like you see on the top. So he photographs changing environments. Buzz Princeton also is one of them. Most of the pictures you see here are from Dubai. It's the hidden face of the back face of the city. Philippe Dujardin is actually he is constructing images. He makes pictures of buildings. He makes a palette of building elements, textures, and landscapes around him, and then he reconstructs it like completely new, as completely new structures. So the buildings you see here are not real. They are all constructed from other parts of photographs of buildings. So that gives a way to constructing buildings in buildings by photography. And this is one of interesting examples that I also like. Sohei Nishino makes dioramas with in the cities he visits. First one on the left is from Istanbul. He makes thousands of pictures by walking the city, and later on he brings them together in a kind of panoramic way on the map of the city. And the second one you can see is New York, Manhattan Island. So this picture is made up of, maybe I can show it a bigger. As you see, there are thousands of pictures, which is making the historical peninsula of Istanbul, even the sea, even the ships. So it's a very interesting, let me say. And when we come to Turkish photographers, of course, there are some examples of them too in Turkey. Serkan Taycan is, for example, capturing urban landscape, the periphery of the urban landscape mostly. And he captured, in his project Between Two Seas, he captured all the route of possible Kanal Istanbul road, and he also make walking tours to that route. He continues his inventory, and of course Murat Germen is one of the well-known photographers who uses space as a source for his artistic production. His series Metamorphosis is kind of a, it is coming from a glitch which happens in digital production of the photography. So he kind of skews the panoramas in one picture and gives abstract visions of urban landscape. And Ali Taptık is also he documents daily life of Istanbul. There was a book called İstanbul'u Resmetmek. There are so many examples of this. And Metehan Özcan is also capturing daily life of buildings or urban realm, and also he also makes before and after pictures like kind of a memory project for urban spaces. And when I come to what I do, can I continue or am I?
Yes, I think you still have time, Sena Hocam.
Yeah. Okay. So I will show you what I do after this. I will try to go faster. Actually, my story with spaces, photographing spaces, started very early. I was 15 years old in 1989, and this place you can see on the left. Actually, I made a photograph of this space. This was a skewed old house in Odunpazarı district in Eskişehir, which was skewed between two apartments. And this building stayed like this for the following 20 years, and it was demolished some years ago. And I made a kind of abstract photograph of this space and sent to a competition, and it was selected for the exhibition by the Ministry of Culture. So it was the beginning of my story of photographing space. Later on, after becoming an architect, of course, photography was going parallel to my studies, and I started working as an editor in Yapı Endüstri Merkezi, and then I made a kind of series interviewing with architect photographers and published it in Yapı.com.tr. And later on, after some years, which is also based to my this presentation, I wrote an article on 21 Architectural magazine as alternative approaches in architectural photography. So I'm also trying to make an alternative approach to spaces. And I wrote an manifest, I call it Archilithography, which is coming from architecture, life, and photography. So my motto is like capturing the life in architecture by photography. You can find it in my website. There's a text on manifest. I want to summarize it. Actually, I summarized it from the changing conventions. I also adopted for my approach, like humans will be like the subject of my photographs. I don't clean out the humans from my photographs. And I photograph buildings in every kind of weather conditions, etc. And I don't try to make too many interruptions to the scene. I don't want to carry something from somewhere else to somewhere else, but to show the real existence of the space. And of course, I try to use time as the fourth dimension. And sometimes when photography is not enough, I try to use videos or making time-lapse videos from photographs to show the effects of time. As Hüseyin Kahvecioğlu said, actually the form of the building or form of the space actually loses its meaning in time, and actually in our minds there's another conceptual space forms in time. So in the first days of the building, maybe we can focus on the form, but later on, when we start to use that space, there will be the conceptual meaning of that space, that memories we attach to that space, etc. So this means the spatial spatial experience is created like this. And also, of course, the building layers change. There are some layers of the space, like the site is the most standing thing, not changing thing. Structure is also, but the skin of the building, the services, the space plan, and the people using that building always changes. And so every time this changes, the space has a new meaning, new concept in our minds as well. And of course, atmosphere is very important. I will pass it firstly. I try to focus on atmosphere in the buildings and try to capture the buildings with its atmosphere, actually. And in my studies, usually, in my observations, are usually spaces on everyday transformation of the space in time, and space and memory. My usually observations are focused on these three areas. Let's show some examples. This is showing a context from Beijing. This is the Olympic Stadium in Beijing. After the Olympics, it was guarded by the Beijing army. These pictures will be showing some special experience. You will see so many sports buildings, because I'm also one of my profession is sports architecture. That's why I was touring so many sports buildings around the world. You will see some examples from them. This is a backyard of the Scottish Parliament. This is a Enric Miralles building. A guy is resting at the back part. And these are some spaces that we like to use, or like in South Galata, or we wonder what is happening inside. This is from London Aquatic Center, the outside and inside, the usage of the buildings. Or how children behave structures or buildings and how they use it as a play area. Or sometimes how the activity changes a space, like in Canyon Mall, for example, the gathering place of the Canyon Mall sometimes change function. There are some bazaars, there are some tango milongas like this, and the activity changes the space. So every time you change the activity or the time or the people in the space, the meaning of the space changes, and I try to capture these spaces in different times. This is also an experience, actually. People were jumping, the children were jumping there, and I also tried that and tried to make that experiences photograph. This is from Berlin. This is the experience of turning around the Arch de Triomphe in Paris. So It is from the 12 corners of the adjacent streets when you turn around the building. Or again from Paris, La Défense, how people use the space for talking, resting, etc. Or for skating or for bicycle purposes. As you see, architecture usually makes a background for people's activities. And this is a video. This is how people use the trampolines. So this is an observation of how people use the area. And it can be a good input for architects or the designers of the space, actually. Almost every people passing from there, especially children, just try those trampolines. And this is another experience. This is from Denmark, Copenhagen. That's an experience with a bicycle. Actually, if you are in Copenhagen, for sure you are using bicycles. And you can pass underneath a building. This is a headquarters of a bank in Copenhagen. So I just wanted to experience how is the experience of passing from underneath a building with a bicycle and passing it. Also different in different climate and air conditions, the same space during the snow and after the snow melted, for example. And also again, this is Taşkışla Technical University campus. It's a graduation day. In half of the photograph, you can see the graduation ceremony, and in the other half, you can see after the ceremony when the garden returned to its original function. So this is a before and after scene in the same picture. And this is also a time lapse before an activity. This is a concert. Let me bring here. Setting up the stage of the concert. This shows around 11 days before the Shakira concert in Istanbul 2 years ago. All this video is made up of photographs, actually, which are shot in 30-second intervals. Let's go faster. I will bring it faster, as you see. So this is a good input for how this kind of an event happens. This is also before and after picture like Michael Vesely does. This was the old stadium of Arsenal. Then it was demolished and a residential complex was built, but some of the part of the stadium was preserved. So you can see it over. And these are pictures from historical. This is one of them is Old Greek Orphanage. Sorry. And second one is St. Pierre Han in Karaköy. I also captured for some years, as I was a user of the stadium before demolishing the Beşiktaş İnönü Stadium, and its transformation to the new stadium, the demolishing, the construction of the stadium. And the picture you saw in the cover also shows like a 1 year interval from the demolishing and constructing period of the stadium. So these are before and after pictures taken in different times. This is kind of a Michael Vesely picture showing 6 months of construction. These are also, let me show like this. So this is the completed pitch of the stadium, and this is the underneath. So these were taken from the same point in different times and bring together on layers. So you can see the layers of the space in one photograph. Here also it is like that. And you will see from one angle all these 3 years transformation. This was done not done by a fixed camera, but shot from the same point. And again, this is a Tottenham Stadium in London. One part is from construction stage, and second one is from the one of the. It was the Champions League final. People were watching in the stadium. The first photograph is not from me, but the photograph during the construction is shot by me. So I brought them together to see the finished and before part of the stadium. And this is the new tower, TV tower. And this is like 1.5 year building of the stages of the new tower. These were also all shot by photographs. And this is, in order to show the context, this can be a good example. This is one of the views of my house. You can assume that I live in a landscape area, in a village or something. But actually, this is here. So sometimes context is very important to give meaning to what you understand from that urban environment. I called it daydream. Again, context. This is what you see on the left in the normal times, but when you look down, you can see that the workers there just drying their things. This is also actually interesting scene from London Olympic Park. Again, context gives meaning to what you are looking at. And also cityscapes. This was an old petrol station in Bursa, and it was being used like a kind of office, although lost its function. Also, I documented some spaces as a project, for example, Salt Galata, the daily life of Salt Galata, how people use the space. And also, after the completion of the stadium, I also captured some phases of the usage of stadium. And this is the last one. This is called technology. It is called Hackaboom. Like they are during 24 hours. They have to design. They have to design an application. It's like a workshop. And during that time, they wanted me to document the organization. So it also shows how people use the space during 24 hours. It was an interesting experience also for me. And that's it from my presentation. Thank you for listening. And of course, I'm open to your questions.
Thank you very much, Sena Hocam, for this very inspiring and stimulating presentation. I think it has been really very helpful to our students, especially the first year students are with us now. I believe it had been helpful to understand the relation between architecture, space, and photography, and seeing the transformation of photography as a tool is also very important for them. How people use space, the layering issue, adding time as the fourth dimension. I believe, this presentation has really broadened the perspectives of our students. Maybe now I can turn to our students for the questions. You can either raise your hands for asking a question, or maybe you can write it to the chat box. In fact, generally, of course, warming up takes some time, Sena Hocam.
Well, I'm open to your questions.
Yeah, formulating the questions, etc. I got really very excited while watching the presentation, both parts, because nowadays, especially for our first year students, the context is sometimes movie scenes or just piece of photographs from different parts of the world. And they are also creating fictional spaces, and we specifically ask them to pay attention to the interaction between space and the people, and also the activities, and especially the last examples and the videos you have shown to us were great examples from that aspect. I would like to ask, do you have any advices to our students regarding how to improve their eyes in terms of taking or analyzing the photos?
Mm-hmm. The best way for it is to look as much picture as they can, of course. Now, actually, everybody is doing that, because now in our lives there's a phenomenon called Instagram. So every day we see thousands of photographs. Also in the web pages or on the internet, we see so many photographs. The communication is mostly relied on photographs, actually. So the best way is to look as much as photographs as they can, but also try to make kind of fictional frames in their minds. Like, for example, looking at something, they can try to frame it in their minds. They don't need to make it with a camera. Actually, they have a camera. Everybody has a camera now. So they can also do it. In one part of my photography past, I used to carry a very small pocket camera with me. It was an automatic camera, but it was so easy to just take it out and make a picture of what I want. So it developed my looking at things very much. Today we have that opportunity because everybody has a camera, so it's much easier. So try to frame as much as you can with your mobile phone. When you frame something, you leave something out. That means that you decide what to frame, what to take into the frame. So that's a decision. Doing that decision as much as they can, always develop their eyes of looking at things, I can say.
Thank you very much, Sena Hocam. Meanwhile, the questions started to come to the chat box, okay. So I will continue with them. Yasmin Lahuel has a question. She says, at the beginning, you mentioned positives and negatives in photography.
Yeah.
And I would like to understand those terms, she says,
yeah.
or asks.
Actually, in the first captures of the scenes, they usually had to, for example, I showed a metal plate. How can I say? Sürmek diyeceğim ama. You just, let me say put, okay. You put a kind of chemical, which is a sensitive chemical to light, on that plate surface. So the vision directly happens in that surface. So it is like the positive. It becomes directly positive. But later on, they introduced the negative films or some materials that they can use as a negative, and then they captured the scene to a negative, but in order to see it positive, like we see in the pictures, they have to print it to a paper-based material, so it becomes a positive. Negative is like, actually, for example, now you are seeing me in my proper colors, etc. But in the negative, you will see the whites as black, blacks as white. So when you print it to a paper, it becomes a positive. Also, in the past, there were slides. We used to shoot slides. Slides were direct positives, like, okay, it will mix their minds a bit, but we didn't need to make a negative and then print it to positive. We directly shot, for example, color pictures into slides. So we can show it directly, for example, in the slide machine without developing it in the dark room or something else. So bringing from negative to positive becomes in a dark room, actually.
Thank you very much. I hope it's clear, Yasmin. There is another question and a comment together, maybe, by Yosun Kurtulmaz. She says, I think maybe she's a friend of yours. I don't know.
She's my cousin.
Oh, great. In fact, she says that it's a very nice presentation and thanks a lot for that, and asks, do you want to collect them in a book, or do you planning such a project, like, you know, book project?
Actually, there are some book projects that I am in actually now. One of them, actually, it was introduced some months ago, so I can tell. I was in Ankara in September picturing Anıtkabir, for example. And there will be a book coming from Ankara municipality about Anıtkabir's architecture. And it was written by the son of one of the architects of Anıtkabir. So it will be very interesting telling about the memories of from that period, from the construction period, etc. It will be released on most probably on April or May. And another book is still waiting. There was a I captured photographs of an historical building, which is now being reconstructed, and it will turn into an institution. And so I made the existing photographs of the building. Later on, they will also add the constructed buildings photographs, and they will make a book about the building. There are these kinds of projects, and of course I also want to make a book of two of my projects. One of them is sports landscapes, which I made the exhibition. I hope I can make a book of it as well. And other one is I also want to make an exhibition of that Beşiktaş Stadium reconstruction period, because it was a very wide documentation of 3.5 years, and I want to make an exhibition and book of it.
And it happened somehow.
Okay.
Thank you very much.
You.
Thank you very much. We are looking forward to, I will say.
Thank you so much.
Thank you for the question. And we have a question from one of our students, from İlayda Aytin. She says it was definitely a very nice and helpful presentation. Thank you. I have a question. I can't reflect the environment when I take a photo. So I guess I cannot show the contexts like the tree and the road section you showed last. What do you recommend? I think they are really very much impressed from your works somehow, because you are too much interested in this interaction between the people and the built environment, and the context pictures were really telling much. And I am personally very much impressed with the daydream issue, the scale, and you know how it deceives somehow us. And at the moment, they are dealing with really finding a context from their, environment, and in fact, using the photo of it. I mean, do two-dimensional representation somehow as a context. And I think they are going through some difficulties in doing that. And maybe your presentation have been very inspirational for them regarding coming up with some innovative methods, maybe, because you added time as the fourth dimension, the before and after issue, showing the infrastructure and maybe the clean finished work together. I mean, the process is in there. I think these had been really very helpful, but at the moment they still maybe some of our students might be going through difficulties. Maybe İlayda, if you want to elaborate or open up the question, you can help me. But as far as I understand, especially while dealing with the context, do you have any advices while taking the photo?
Of course, it's up to what kind of a context it is, but if we are talking about urban context, urban photography, or urban space, let me say. Actually, of course, there are too many distracting elements in urban. For example, there are some advertisement banners, street lights, some cars, etc. We always try to, if we are making a architectural photography, for example, usually the architects doesn't like them, and they ask us to get rid of all of them. Sometimes we have to clean in the Photoshop. We have to clean all these obstructing things like street lights, cars, etc. So we have to build up a new photograph. Actually, what I'm mentioning in this presentation is more like capturing the true essence of the space, like capturing how it is. So you don't have to take everything out, but as we are as we have been educated as architects, and as you are being educated as architects now for students, there's always disturbing elements in the photographs. There will always be disturbing elements in the photograph. Just try to be peaceful with them. Don't omit them right away, and try to think of how you can use that element for the advantage of your photograph. How you can use that element for your idea. When you are making a picture, it means actually it is made for transforming an idea to the people who are looking at that photograph. So always think of it. What element in the context supports my idea? What element in that context disturbs my idea? If you are sure that it is disturbing your idea, try to get rid of it. Try to change your frame. Try to change your position. Try to change your if you have an interchangeable lens camera. Try to change your lens, etc. But always think of what is adding to your photograph and what is taking from your photograph. Decide according to that in the context. Maybe this can be a formula.
Thank you very much, Sena Hocam. Also, there is a following question. Somehow, again, we have the even word formula maybe in it. This is by Tanya Hoca. In fact, she also thanks for the presentation and asks, do you have advice about the composition, the choice of the photo? As Raymond Depardon in the book Errands recommend to take a vertical photo with vanishing point in the middle, like this maybe. I mean, what is your secret, she asks.
Actually, of course, there are some composition rules, like the 1/3 rule. For example, if you divide a frame in 3 pieces, in horizontal, in vertical, actually the eye goes to the points of those crossing lines, like the intersecting lines. So there's a 9. How can I
square.
show?
9 square, 9 square.
So it's when you divide the picture to 9 parts, like 3 vertical and 3 horizontal parts, the intersection points of those lines are the points that the eyes go first. So our eyes usually look at that points, at that crossing points first. That's a very common composition rule. So usually, if you want to emphasize something in your photograph, the subject, it is better that you should place in that point one of those 4 points of that intersecting points. But that is the very easiest composition rule. For example, of course, for example, if you are shooting something going to the right side, looking at the right side, you should have a empty space in front of it. So it will give you more comfortable to look at the photograph. So there should be empty space in the direction of the movement of the subject, for example. These are kind of simple rules, but knowing the rules and not obeying them is the best formula, I can say.
Okay, thank you very much. It's already 8 o'clock, but still we have questions, so I will be quick in asking them. Okay, thank you very much. I hope you're not very tired, Sena Hocam. Bengusu İksoy, again, one of our instructors, she asks, among your works, which one is your favorite and why?
Oh, it's a very difficult question. Actually, each of them has its own context, its own memory. But I usually like this long time observation ones because there's too much effort on that. For example, the building up of the Çamlıca TV tower. I captured that for one and a half year, and it was like it wasn't a fixed. I mean, it was a fixed camera, but I had to use that camera sometimes. So I have to change the cameras. I have to change the lenses, actually, and I have to reframe it in the same frame again, and making the film takes so many time. And also, it was the same for this. Beşiktaş Stadium, that 3 years time showing that video. It was also like that. Actually, I like the ones that I can see the difference from start to the end. So it gives me more feelings, let me say. Mm-hmm. Because it's like a child, as you know, it grows in
All
time.
All of them, maybe.
Yeah.
In fact, it should be very difficult to differentiate. We have 2 more questions. I will start with Kaan because Mertcan's question is not very clear to me. Maybe Mertcan, I will be really very happy if you explain more. Kaan also thanks for the presentation. And he says you have included the Notre Dame Cathedral. What role does photography play in the development and renewal of architecture?
Yeah. As I said also in the presentation, it is a good document. Actually, for example, if you want to rebuild a historical building, you have to first capture its photographs. So it becomes a document in your hand. Later on, when you are doing something, you can refer back to those photographs. For example, in some details, or even for having the drawings of some details, you have to photograph the buildings. Sometimes you draw that details from the photographs. You just transfer it to AutoCAD, for example, and you draw the detail from the photograph. But there's a photogrammetry technique now. They can make a 3D scan of the buildings, and they can precisely bring drawings from those scans. That's also a kind of photographing technique. And as in the Notre Dame example, that's a great example actually, because maybe you have seen there was a wooden tower of the cathedral, and it was burnt during the fire. In this picture, that wooden tower was not built yet. In the picture I showed you, but probably there are so many photographs of that tower in time. I also made some pictures of it while it was alive. So those photographs will help to rebuild this original structure as it was before, like the original one. So of course it's a very useful document for rebuilding.
Thank you very much. And I think this is the last question. I'm going to ask, but I'm not very sure about the last part of it. This is by Mertcan Saykal. He also thanks a lot for the presentation. To show a building and its environment in different photos. Maybe this is an opportunity for the structure, or is it an unethical action for the buyer to take?
I think he's asking like to change the environment in the photos, or
I understood what he mentions actually. That's a demand which we usually get from our clients sometimes, especially for example, if you are shooting a housing complex or a residential complex which is newly built, they can ask you to, for example, show the environment more lively, like for example, bringing another landscape to that area in the photograph, or maybe changing. Okay, you can change the clouds or the weather, or it doesn't matter too much. But for example, if you are changing the landscape of that building, for example, you are looking from a window outside to outside, you are showing the view of the it can be an example flat of that residential complex. When you look from the window, if you see in the picture a different landscape than it is actually is, it's a problem, because you use that picture for marketing purposes. You sell the house maybe from photographs, and when people come and starts to live in that environment, of course they will be surprised. It's also in models, in architecture models, that is something, or also in renders. The first thing is renders, of course, because in the renders you see very lively environments, which is full of people and very lively. But in the architectural photographs, actually architects wants us not to show people. It's very contradictory with the renders they draw and the photographs they ask from us. And when you go there to make the same, for example, some architects sometimes want the same angle in the render to make the photographs of the same angles. And when we go there, of course, we cannot see that lively environment. Sometimes the shops are still empty. People are not living there yet. And that can, of course, be a problem. I always in the side of reality, actually.
Thank you very much.
I sometimes refuse to do that kinds of things, actually.
Yes, also that was a very nice question. Meanwhile, another question dropped to our box. Maybe that might be the last, our dear students. I think Coşku has also very much affected from your sport building series also. And she is asking, how do you think, I mean, first she mentions that, you know, everything and also architecture is changing. How do you think this change is reflected in sports fields and buildings, I guess?
Actually, that's, of course, it's a very big subject. But to summarize, I can say sports buildings are more social. I'm not mentioning the COVID period, but before that. In the recent years, before the COVID period, the sports buildings are functioning more like social hubs. They are not just buildings where you go to make sports and spend your time just for making sport, but they became like social meeting areas with other functions where you can sit, where you can go with your family, spend the whole day in the building, etc. Actually, the trend in the world is like that, but still in Turkey, we have a long way to go in that. And when you look at, for example, rebuilt stadiums in the last 10 years in Turkey, we can see that you can see that sorry, I got a phone call, sorry. We can see that these stadiums are usually carried out from the city, okay, they are bigger, more modern. Maybe there are some good conditions than the existing stadiums, but they are out of the city and you have to travel to go there, and you just go there for attending a match as a spectator just for that purpose, and they are not that lively. For me, the sports buildings should be in the community, should be in the city centers, should be very related to community, but of course we will see how it will happen after the COVID period. That's very different times now.
Mm-hmm. Okay, thank you very much. I think, yes, as you have mentioned, this is a very broad topic, but you mentioned something really very critical for the urban life. Thank you very much, Sena Hocam, for this enriching talk. I think we can understand how helpful it was for our students from the number of the questions coming. And it was a pleasure for you to host you in the first event of the spring semester. Mine Hoca has also a few words to share with you, so I am leaving the screen to her now.
Sena Hocam, thank you for this refreshing presentation. It's been great having you with us again. And I think you know that we have a little tradition here in ArchiDesign Talks. As Bahçeşehir University, Faculty of Architecture and Design, we donate to Tema in our guest's name. So now you have 5 young trees in a memorial forest in your name. We thank you so much for all your time and all your efforts.
Thank you so much. That's a very nice gift. Thank you. Thank you.
Okay, I think we can call it a night, and I want to thank all of our students. They were very active, so thank you all. Okay, and we hope to see you in other events.
By the way, I want to add something. This term I don't have a class in Bahçeşehir University, but probably in the next term, in the autumn term, probably I will start again. So some of the people, some of the students here can come to architectural photography class. Hope so. So maybe we can be face-to-face teacher to student there.
Yeah, we hope.
Hope so.
We hope. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you, and good evening, everybody.
Good evening.
Thank you, Nilay. Thank you.
Thank you.